The moment you begin to listen to this message, something unusual may already be happening inside you. There is a calm that feels unfamiliar, almost suspicious, as if your mind is searching for the usual wave of anxiety that used to live in your chest. For so long, pressure was your normal state. You were used to waking up with tension, moving through the day with a quiet sense that something could collapse at any moment. Your thoughts were trained to scan the horizon for the next problem, the next disappointment, the next unexpected blow. But right now, something feels different. The heaviness that once pressed against your spirit seems strangely absent. You may even find yourself wondering if this quiet feeling is temporary, as if your mind expects the old storm to return at any second. Yet the silence you are feeling is not a warning sign. It is not the empty pause before another struggle begins. What you are sensing is the aftermath of a battle that has already been won. The tension that once lived inside your spirit has faded, because something deep in the spiritual realm has shifted in your favor. What feels like emptiness is not emptiness at all. It is the silence left behind when a curse finally loses its power. It is the stillness that appears when a cycle of suffering is broken at its root. For years, perhaps even for most of your life, you carried struggles that seemed larger than your own story. Certain patterns followed you no matter how hard you tried to escape them. Situations repeated themselves with different faces but the same painful outcomes. Opportunities would appear only to collapse at the last moment. Relationships would begin with hope and end with confusion. Financial doors would open briefly and then close again without explanation. Many times you may have wondered why your journey felt heavier than the journeys of those around you. You may have asked yourself why progress seemed slower, why the tests lasted longer, why the pressure refused to disappear. What you were experiencing was not random misfortune. You were walking through battles that began long before you were born. Generations before you prayed for relief from these same cycles. They struggled against invisible walls they could not fully understand. They fought through pain, through hardship, through disappointment, hoping that one day someone in their bloodline would finally break through the barrier. Many of them tried with all the strength they had, yet they could not reach the moment you are standing in now. But something changed. At some point in your recent journey, a decision was made within your spirit that altered the trajectory of your entire lineage. It may not have looked dramatic on the outside. It may have appeared as a quiet choice, a moment of restraint, a refusal to respond to negativity the way you once would have. Yet in the unseen realm, that moment carried enormous weight. It was the moment when the cycle encountered resistance it had never faced before. Instead of feeding the old patterns, you interrupted them. Instead of repeating the reactions that kept the cycle alive, you stepped outside of it. And when that happened, the chain that had stretched across generations finally cracked. What you are experiencing now is the result of that break. A spiritual threshold has been crossed. A new level of awareness, authority, and alignment has opened in front of you. In the language of this message, you have just unlocked what we call level 777. This level represents more than a symbolic number. It represents the point where survival mode ends and a new chapter of spiritual maturity begins. For years, your focus may have been on endurance, simply learning how to survive the storms around you. But level 777 is different. It is not about surviving hardship. It is about learning how to stand in a new kind of peace that your life has rarely experienced before. That is why this calm may feel unfamiliar. Your mind was trained to operate in the noise of struggle. Now, you are stepping into a quieter atmosphere, where clarity replaces confusion and stability replaces chaos. Yet reaching this level is only the beginning of a new responsibility. A higher level always requires a higher awareness. If you attempt to operate in this new season with the same mindset that belonged to your old struggles, the peace you have discovered will feel unstable. That is why this message exists. You are being invited to understand what has happened, to recognize the significance of this shift, and to learn how to remain anchored in this new frequency. The victory you have stepped into is real, but maintaining it requires intention. Your spirit has already crossed the threshold. Now your mind must learn how to live there as well. The strange peace. After the battle begins with a realization that may feel both comforting and confusing at the same time. You are being invited to recognize that the calm settling over your spirit right now is not accidental, and it is not a trick of your imagination. It is evidence that something significant has already taken place in the unseen layers of your life. For a long time, you were accustomed to measuring your days by the amount of pressure you could endure. Stress was not just an occasional visitor. It became the background noise of your existence. You woke up anticipating problems before they even arrived. Your mind learned to calculate risk constantly, scanning conversations, finances, relationships, and opportunities for signs of potential collapse. That constant tension slowly rewired the way you perceived normal life. When someone lives in survival mode long enough, struggle begins to feel familiar, almost predictable. The chaos may have been painful, but it was at least a landscape you understood. You knew how to fight. You knew how to brace yourself for impact. You knew how to push forward, even when everything around you seemed uncertain. Survival became your skill, and endurance became your identity. That is why the peace you feel now may seem strange. It does not match the environment your mind spent years preparing for. When pressure suddenly disappears, the body and the mind do not always relax immediately. Instead, they search for the next threat, almost expecting something to go wrong, simply because things feel too quiet. Your thoughts may whisper questions that sound like caution. They ask whether this peace is temporary. They wonder if the calm is only the space between two storms. This reaction is natural for someone who has spent a long season navigating difficulty. Your nervous system was trained to expect conflict, just as a soldier returning from a battlefield sometimes struggles to adjust to silence. But what you are experiencing right now is not the pause before another battle. It is the quiet that follows a war that has already ended. There is a difference between temporary relief and a true breakthrough. And what you are stepping into belongs to the second category. A breakthrough does not always announce itself with fireworks or dramatic signs. Sometimes it arrives as a gentle shift in the atmosphere of your life. The weight you once carried begins to lift. The situations that once triggered panic lose their power. The constant urgency to fight every battle slowly fades away. At first, your mind may interpret this shift as unfamiliar territory, but over time, your spirit begins to recognize what is happening. The struggle that once defined your path no longer holds the same authority over your life. This moment marks the beginning of a new spiritual season. Seasons in life are rarely announced with a loud declaration, yet they can be recognized by the changes they produce. In your previous season, endurance was the primary lesson. You learned resilience through challenges that stretched your patience and tested your faith. Now the lesson is different. The season you are entering is not built around constant struggle, but around stability and clarity. Peace is becoming the environment in which your spirit grows. This does not mean that life will never present challenges again. Every meaningful journey still contains obstacles. But the difference now is that struggle is no longer the foundation of your existence. Instead of living in reaction to every crisis, you are learning to live from a deeper center of calm awareness. The peace you feel is not weakness, and it is not complacency. It is the result of battles that have already been fought within you. Every moment you chose patience instead of anger, faith instead of despair, and perseverance instead of surrender, quietly built the path that brought you here. You may not have realized it at the time, but each of those decisions reshaped the direction of your life. Now you are beginning to see the result. The strange peace after the battle is not emptiness. It is the first glimpse of what life feels like when your spirit is no longer trapped in constant survival. It is the atmosphere of a new chapter, where strength no longer comes from fighting every moment, but from standing firmly in the calm authority that your journey has earned. When the desert begins to flood, is best understood through a powerful image that has echoed through spiritual teaching for centuries. The image of water suddenly appearing in a dry and lifeless desert. The ancient words spoken through the prophet Isaiah describe this transformation in a way that is both poetic and deeply practical. God says that He will make a road in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. Many people hear that verse and imagine a gentle trickle of water slowly improving the landscape. But the reality of water entering a desert is far more dramatic than that. When rain finally breaks over land that has been dry for years, the ground does not calmly absorb it at first. The water rushes across the cracked surface with surprising force. What was once hard and lifeless soil suddenly becomes alive with movement. Channels form where there were none before. The landscape begins to change quickly, sometimes so quickly that the people witnessing it struggle to believe what they are seeing. This is the image that describes the transformation unfolding in your life right now. For a long time, your journey may have resembled that desert. You walked through seasons where progress seemed painfully slow. Effort did not always produce the results you hoped for. Opportunities seemed scarce, and the environment around you sometimes felt barren of encouragement or support. A desert does not mean that life is impossible, but it does mean that survival requires constant endurance. In that environment, you learned how to conserve your strength, how to move carefully, and how to survive even when resources appeared limited. Yet deserts also carry a hidden truth. Beneath the surface of that dry ground are seeds waiting for the moment when water finally arrives. Those seeds remain invisible during the long drought, but they are not dead. They are simply waiting for the right conditions to awaken. When water finally reaches them, something remarkable happens. What once looked empty begins to burst with life. Plants rise from the ground that seemed incapable of producing anything. The same landscape that once looked hopeless suddenly becomes vibrant with color and growth. In the same way, the season you are entering now may feel overwhelming precisely because it contrasts so strongly with the season that came before it. When blessings arrive after long hardship, they often feel unfamiliar. Your mind, which spent years preparing for scarcity, may initially struggle to understand abundance. When doors begin to open, your first instinct might be to wonder whether they will close again. When opportunities appear, you may find yourself cautiously examining them, almost expecting them to disappear as quickly as they arrived. This reaction is not weakness. It is the residue of the desert mindset that helped you survive. But the reality is that your life is no longer operating under the same conditions. Something deeper has shifted. The drought season that shaped your resilience is giving way to a season where growth becomes possible in ways that once seemed distant or impossible. The transformation may not happen all at once, yet the direction has clearly changed. Where there was once dryness, there is now movement. Where there was once waiting, there is now emergence. The landscape of your life is becoming fertile ground again. Fertile ground does not simply support survival. It invites expansion. It allows new ideas to take root, new relationships to grow, and new opportunities to develop in ways that could not happen before. You are witnessing the early stages of that change. What once felt like a wasteland is slowly revealing its hidden potential. The seeds planted during your most difficult seasons are beginning to awaken. They carry lessons, wisdom, and strength that were formed during the years of endurance. Now those same lessons are becoming the nutrients that support a new chapter of growth. The desert was never the final destination of your story. It was the place where your roots were strengthened beneath the surface. And now that the rivers have begun to flow, the same ground that once tested your survival is becoming the foundation where your future will grow. Breaking the generational cycle begins with a truth that many people sense in their lives but rarely take the time to fully understand. Your journey did not begin the moment you were born. Long before you took your first breath, patterns were already forming within the story of your family. Every generation leaves behind more than memories. It leaves behind habits, fears, beliefs, and emotional responses that quietly pass from one life to the next. Some of these inheritances are beautiful. They include strength, resilience, faith, creativity, and the determination to keep moving forward even when circumstances are difficult. Yet other inheritances carry the weight of unresolved pain. Trauma that was never healed can echo through decades. Financial struggles that were never solved can become familiar patterns. Cycles of anger, addiction, fear, or self-doubt can travel silently through families, shaping the decisions of people who never consciously chose them. When someone steps into life carrying these invisible burdens, the journey often feels unusually heavy. They may work harder than others, yet still encounter the same obstacles repeatedly. They may strive to build something new while feeling pulled backward by forces they cannot easily explain. At times, this experience leads to frustration and confusion. You may have looked at your path and wondered why progress required so much effort compared with those around you. You may have questioned whether something was wrong with you, or why certain doors seemed harder to open. But the deeper truth is that you were never just fighting personal battles. You were confronting cycles that had been quietly repeating for years before you arrived. Imagine a chain that stretches across generations. Each link represents a choice, a reaction, or a belief formed in response to the struggles of its time. Some links were created through pain, others through fear, others through survival instincts that made sense in their original context. Over time, the chain becomes stronger because each generation unknowingly adds another link by repeating what came before. Most people inherit that chain without realizing it. They simply step into the same patterns and continue them. But occasionally, someone appears within a family who begins to question those patterns. They feel a quiet refusal inside their spirit. Something tells them that the story does not have to continue the same way. That person often experiences the most resistance because they are pushing against a structure that has existed for years. Breaking a generational cycle requires more than determination. It requires awareness, courage, and a willingness to choose differently when the old reactions try to take control. Every time you refused to respond with bitterness when anger would have been easier, you weakened the chain. Every time you chose patience instead of repeating the conflict you grew up around, another link cracked. Every moment you decided to pursue growth rather than surrender to despair, the chain lost more of its strength. These decisions may have seemed small when they happened. They may have felt like quiet, personal victories that no one else noticed. Yet in the deeper architecture of your life, those moments carried extraordinary power. They altered the direction of the story itself. This is what it means to become a cycle breaker. A cycle breaker does not simply escape the struggles of the past. They interrupt the momentum of those struggles so that the generations that follow them will not have to fight the same battles. The courage required to do this is rarely celebrated in dramatic ways, but its impact is profound. When a generational cycle finally breaks, the atmosphere of the entire family line begins to change. Opportunities that once seemed unreachable slowly become possible. Mindsets that were once defined by limitation begin to shift toward possibility. The future no longer has to repeat the past. If you have felt the weight of this responsibility during your life, it was not because you were unlucky. It was because you were strong enough to carry the assignment of transformation. The struggles you faced were not meant to destroy you. They were the pressure that revealed the strength necessary to reshape your story. Now you are beginning to see the result of that perseverance. The chain that once stretched across generations has lost its hold, and the moment you are standing in now represents the point where the old pattern finally gives way to a new path forward. The moment that triggered the breakthrough does not begin with something grand or dramatic. It begins with a moment that, on the surface, may have looked ordinary, even frustrating. Yet hidden inside that moment was a decision that quietly changed the entire direction of your story. Breakthroughs rarely arrive during comfortable seasons. They tend to appear in the middle of tension, when emotions are high and the pressure to react feels almost irresistible. For you, the turning point likely came during a situation where someone crossed a line. Perhaps it was a betrayal that caught you off guard. Maybe someone spoke about you in a way that was unfair or dishonest. Perhaps a person you trusted acted in a way that exposed their true intentions. Whatever the specific details were, the emotional impact was real. Your heart felt the sting of disappointment. Your mind quickly replayed the situation, analyzing what happened and why it happened. In moments like that, the human instinct is predictable. When we feel wronged, we want to defend ourselves. When someone misrepresents us, we feel compelled to correct the narrative immediately. When anger rises inside us, the natural impulse is to respond with equal force. This reaction has deep psychological roots. It is connected to our sense of justice and our desire to protect our identity. Our nervous system interprets betrayal as a threat, and it prepares us to fight back. That is why your first impulse in that moment may have been to respond quickly. Perhaps you reached for your phone, ready to send a message that would explain everything. Perhaps words formed in your mind that you were prepared to say out loud. Perhaps you imagined confronting the situation head-on, with the same intensity that was directed toward you. From a human perspective, you had every reason to do so. Anyone observing the situation might have agreed that your anger was justified. Yet something unusual happened in that moment. Instead of releasing that reaction into the world, you paused. It may have been only a few seconds. It may have felt like an internal hesitation that you could not fully explain. But during that pause, a different choice emerged. Instead of responding immediately, you chose restraint. Instead of fueling the conflict, you stepped back from it. Instead of reacting from emotion, you allowed silence to speak where anger once would have. That decision may have felt small at the time. It may even have felt uncomfortable because your mind was still processing the situation while your spirit was choosing a different direction. Silence can feel unnatural when you are accustomed to defending yourself. Restraint can feel like weakness when your emotions are demanding expression. Yet what you did in that moment carried enormous power in ways that were not visible immediately. When conflict occurs, it often operates like a loop. One reaction triggers another reaction, which triggers yet another response in return. Each person involved feeds energy into the cycle, and the cycle grows stronger with every exchange. Anger produces more anger. Accusations invite more accusations. Defensive words provoke even stronger defensive responses. The conflict begins to feed itself, like a fire that spreads with every gust of wind. But every cycle has one vulnerability. If someone refuses to feed it, the cycle begins to weaken. When you chose silence instead of retaliation, you disrupted the pattern that the conflict was expecting. The situation anticipated your reaction. The emotional environment was prepared for escalation. Yet when that reaction did not arrive, something unusual happened. The cycle lost its momentum. Imagine two people pulling on opposite ends of a rope in a game of tension. The force of the struggle depends on both sides continuing to pull. But if one side suddenly releases the rope, the entire dynamic changes instantly. The struggle that once felt intense collapses because the energy sustaining it is gone. Your restraint acted in the same way. By refusing to respond with the same energy that was directed at you, you removed the fuel that kept the cycle alive. In spiritual language, this moment represents a profound shift. When a person reacts from anger, they often become temporarily trapped inside the emotional environment created by the conflict. Their thoughts, their words, and their actions become shaped by the same energy that initiated the problem. But when someone chooses restraint, they step outside of that environment. They refuse to allow the situation to dictate their internal state. Instead of becoming another participant in the cycle, they become the point where the cycle ends. This is why moments like this carry such transformative power. The breakthrough did not occur because the conflict disappeared instantly. It occurred because you changed your position within the situation. Instead of standing inside the storm, you stepped beyond it. Instead of amplifying the negativity that was directed toward you, you allowed that negativity to encounter a boundary that it could not cross. Your silence was not passive. It was intentional. It was a decision to place your energy somewhere higher than the conflict itself. Many spiritual teachings describe this principle in different ways, but they all point toward the same truth. The most powerful response is not always the loudest one. True strength often reveals itself through discipline rather than reaction. When a person refuses to mirror the hostility directed at them, they demonstrate a level of control that anger cannot achieve. They show that their identity is not defined by the opinions or behavior of others. Instead, their actions are guided by a deeper sense of purpose. That is exactly what happened in your turning point moment. You chose alignment with a higher principle instead of temporary emotional satisfaction. You chose patience instead of retaliation. You chose clarity instead of chaos. From a purely psychological perspective, this kind of response requires significant self-awareness. It means that your mind is no longer operating purely on impulse. You have developed the ability to observe your own emotions without allowing them to control your actions. This capacity is one of the most important indicators of personal growth. It shows that you have reached a stage where your inner stability is stronger than external pressure. But beyond psychology, there is also a spiritual dimension to this choice. Many traditions teach that when a person refuses to return harm with harm, they create space for a higher form of justice to operate. Instead of trying to control every outcome themselves, they allow truth and time to reveal what is real. This does not mean ignoring injustice or pretending that wrong actions are acceptable. It means trusting that your peace is more valuable than winning an argument that would only pull you back into the same cycle. In the unseen realm of influence and energy, your response sent a powerful signal. The cycle that had repeated itself for years encountered something it could not predict. It encountered someone who refused to behave according to the old pattern. That single decision altered the direction of the momentum surrounding you. It created a point where the past could no longer continue repeating itself in the same way. That is why this moment triggered the breakthrough you are experiencing now. It was not the loudest moment of your journey, but it was one of the most important. It revealed that you had grown beyond the reactions that once controlled your path. You demonstrated that your peace was no longer dependent on the behavior of others. Instead, it was anchored in a deeper awareness of who you had become. Every journey toward transformation contains a moment like this. It is the moment when the old pattern expects you to repeat the same reaction, and you quietly choose something different. That difference may appear small in the moment, but it carries the power to redirect the entire future. Your silence in that conflict was not a retreat. It was a declaration that you no longer belonged to the cycle that once held you. It was the moment when your spirit stepped forward and said that the story would move in a new direction from that point onward. The moment that triggered the breakthrough continues to unfold in a way that reveals just how powerful that single moment of restraint truly was. When you stepped back from reacting, something deeper than silence occurred. A shift took place within your inner world. The emotional storm that had been building inside you began to settle, and in that settling, you experienced a clarity that reaction could never produce. Anger moves quickly, almost like a reflex. It pushes the mind into a narrow tunnel where the only focus is defending oneself or correcting the situation immediately. But when you paused, you widened that tunnel. Your awareness expanded. Instead of being consumed by the immediate conflict, you became aware of the larger picture of your life. You realized that responding in the old way would only keep you trapped inside the same cycle you had been working so hard to escape. That awareness did not come from logic alone. It came from a deeper level of maturity that had been developing quietly within you through every hardship you had faced. Each difficult experience had slowly built a layer of wisdom inside your spirit. At the time, those experiences may have felt like obstacles, but they were also shaping your capacity to respond differently when the decisive moment arrived. When the conflict occurred, you were not the same person you had been years before. The old version of you might have reacted instantly, driven by the urgency to prove your point or defend your name. The new version of you carried something stronger than urgency. You carried perspective. You had learned that not every battle is meant to be fought out loud. Some battles are won the moment you refuse to participate in them at all. That realization changes the way a person moves through the world. Instead of reacting to every provocation, you begin to choose your responses with intention. You begin to recognize that your energy is valuable and that not every situation deserves access to it. In that moment of restraint, you were protecting something sacred within yourself. You were protecting the peace that had been slowly forming after years of struggle. You were protecting the direction your life was beginning to take. This kind of protection does not always look dramatic from the outside. People watching the situation might have assumed that nothing important happened. They might have interpreted your silence as indifference or weakness. But transformation rarely needs public recognition to be real. The most powerful shifts often occur quietly inside a person's character. When you chose restraint, you were proving to yourself that your growth was real. You were demonstrating that the lessons you had learned through hardship had taken root deeply enough to influence your behavior under pressure. That is the moment when growth becomes permanent. Anyone can talk about patience during calm seasons. Anyone can describe wisdom when there is no challenge testing it. But when the challenge appears, and the same wisdom still guides your actions, that is when the transformation becomes undeniable. You pass through that test without even realizing how significant it was at the time. In many ways, that moment functioned like a doorway. On one side of the doorway stood the version of your life defined by reaction, conflict, and emotional turbulence. On the other side stood a different version of your life, one defined by clarity, composure, and intentional choices. The decision to remain silent was the step that carried you across that threshold. What makes this moment even more remarkable is the ripple effect it created. When you break a cycle in your own behavior, you do more than change a single situation. You change the pattern that would have shaped future situations as well. Every cycle depends on repetition to maintain its strength. Each time the same reaction occurs, the cycle becomes more deeply embedded in your habits and your relationships. But when the reaction changes, the cycle loses its foundation. The pattern no longer knows how to continue. That is exactly what happened in your story. The conflict expected a familiar response, yet your restraint introduced something new into the equation. That new response disrupted the sequence that had been repeating itself for years. Suddenly, the situation had nowhere to go. The energy that once fueled the conflict could not find the reaction it was designed to provoke. This is why spiritual traditions often emphasize the power of non-reaction. It is not about suppressing emotions or pretending that pain does not exist. It is about choosing a response that refuses to amplify negativity. It is about reacting to every provocation keeps a person trapped in the emotional environment created by others. When you remain centered instead, you reclaim control of your inner world. Your peace stops depending on the behavior of the people around you. Instead, it becomes something that arises from within your own alignment and understanding. That is a profound form of freedom. Freedom is not simply the absence of problems. True freedom appears when your internal stability is no longer determined by external chaos. The breakthrough you experienced in that moment represents the beginning of that kind of freedom. You demonstrated that your identity was no longer defined by the reactions that once controlled your life. Instead of being pulled into the emotional gravity of the conflict, you remained anchored in something deeper. That anchor was built through every lesson your journey had taught you. It was built through the patience you learned during difficult seasons, the self-awareness you developed through reflection, and the resilience you cultivated while navigating challenges that tested your strength. All of those qualities converged in that single moment of choice. That is why the moment triggered such a powerful breakthrough. It was the point where your growth became visible in your actions. It was the moment when the past lost its ability to dictate your future. From that point forward, the direction of your life began to change in subtle but undeniable ways. Opportunities that once felt blocked began to appear more naturally. Your relationships began to reflect a different level of clarity. The energy you carried into the world began to shift, and people around you could sense that difference, even if they could not explain it. What they were sensing was the presence of someone who had stepped beyond the cycle of reaction and entered a new level of awareness. This is why that moment of silence was not simply a pause in a conflict. It was the moment when your life crossed into a new dimension of possibility. By refusing to respond with the same energy that once defined your struggles, you open the door to a different future. A future where your decisions are guided by wisdom instead of impulse, by intention instead of reaction, and by peace instead of chaos. And that is the true meaning of the breakthrough that was triggered in that quiet yet powerful moment. Entering a higher state of mind begins with an understanding that the transformation you are experiencing is not only spiritual in nature, but also deeply connected to the way your mind and body function. For many years, people believed that spiritual peace was something mystical, something that could only be felt through prayer, meditation, or rare moments of emotional clarity. While those practices are important, Modern neuroscience has revealed something fascinating. The inner states we describe as calm, clarity, intuition, and deep awareness correspond to very real patterns of activity within the human brain. Your brain operates through electrical rhythms called brainwaves, and these rhythms shift depending on your emotional state, your environment, and the type of thoughts you are experiencing. When life places you under constant pressure, your brain naturally moves into what scientists call the beta state. This is the state associated with alertness, analysis, and problem solving. On the surface, beta activity is not harmful. In fact, it helps you complete daily tasks, make decisions, and navigate responsibilities. But when a person lives under prolonged stress, their brain can become trapped in an intense version of this state known as high beta. High beta is the neurological signature of survival mode. In this condition, the nervous system remains constantly alert, scanning for danger, conflict, or unexpected change. The mind races quickly from one concern to the next. Thoughts become repetitive and often negative because the brain is attempting to prepare for threats before they even appear. Many people who have lived through difficult seasons become very familiar with this mental environment. They wake up with a mind already running at full speed. Even moments that should feel peaceful are interrupted by worries about the future or memories of past struggles. Their body may be physically resting, yet their nervous system remains on guard, as if the battle has not ended. Living in this state for long periods of time can create exhaustion that goes deeper than simple fatigue. It drains emotional resilience and makes it difficult to experience calm even when circumstances improve. This is why the peace you are beginning to feel now may seem unfamiliar. Your brain was trained to operate within the narrow window of survival thinking. For years, your attention was directed toward identifying problems and reacting quickly to whatever appeared next. Yet the moment you chose restraint instead of reaction during your turning point experience, something remarkable began to happen. The emotional pattern that once triggered your high beta stress response was interrupted. Instead of feeding the cycle of tension, you allowed your nervous system to slow down. When the brain senses that it no longer needs to defend itself constantly, it gradually shifts into deeper frequencies. One of these frequencies is known as the theta state. Theta brainwaves are associated with deep relaxation, creative insight, and heightened intuition. This is the state many people enter during moments of prayer, reflection, or profound emotional clarity. In theta, the mind becomes less focused on external conflict and more connected to inner understanding. Instead of reacting automatically, you begin to perceive situations with greater perspective. Ideas that once seemed distant become clearer. Solutions appear naturally because the mind is no longer consumed by stress. Theta also plays an important role in emotional healing. It allows the brain to process experiences without the intensity of fear that once surrounded them. In this state, your thoughts become more fluid, and your awareness expands beyond the narrow tunnel created by survival mode. Alongside theta, there is another state called gamma. Gamma brainwaves are linked to moments of heightened awareness, deep compassion, and powerful insight. Researchers studying advanced meditators have discovered that gamma activity increases during experiences of profound connection and clarity. In many ways, gamma represents the brain operating at its highest level of integration. Thoughts, emotions, and perception align in a way that produces both calm and alertness at the same time. When people describe feeling deeply present, deeply aware, and deeply at peace, they are often experiencing a combination of theta and gamma activity working together. What makes this understanding so important for your journey is that the peace you are feeling now is not simply emotional relief. It is evidence that your entire internal system is recalibrating. You are shifting from a state where fear dictated your reactions to a state where awareness guides your choices. Instead of operating from urgency, you are beginning to operate from clarity. This shift does not mean that logic disappears. Rather, logic becomes balanced with intuition and inner stability. Fear once dominated your reasoning because it was connected to survival instincts. Now that fear is losing its authority, your mind has the freedom to see possibilities that were hidden during stressful periods. You may notice subtle changes in the way you think. Situations that once triggered panic now appear manageable. Decisions that once felt overwhelming now feel clearer. You may even notice moments where ideas arrive unexpectedly, almost like downloads of understanding that appear when your mind becomes quiet enough to receive them. These experiences are signs that your awareness is expanding beyond the narrow frame of survival thinking. You are entering a state where peace is no longer something fragile that can be easily disturbed. Instead, peace becomes the foundation from which you observe and respond to the world around you. This foundation creates a powerful advantage. When fear controls the mind, every decision feels urgent and heavy. But when peace becomes the starting point, the mind has room to evaluate situations calmly. You begin to see opportunities where others only see problems. You begin to recognize patterns that were invisible before. Most importantly, you begin to trust your own inner guidance because it is no longer clouded by constant anxiety. The world may still present challenges, but you are no longer approaching those challenges from a place of panic. Instead, you are meeting them from a higher state of awareness, where clarity and intuition work together. This is what it means to enter a higher state of mind. It is not about escaping reality or pretending that life will never bring difficulty again. It is about operating from a level of consciousness that is no longer dominated by fear. Your peace overrides the automatic reactions that once defined your survival mindset. In this new state, your thoughts become tools for creation rather than weapons for self-defense. Your awareness becomes a guide that helps you navigate complexity without losing your center. And as this state stabilizes within you, you begin to realize something extraordinary. The calm you once thought was temporary is actually the beginning of a new way of living. A way where your mind is no longer trapped inside the noise of constant struggle, but instead functions from a deeper rhythm of understanding, resilience, and quiet power. The three gatekeepers of the new level begins with a truth that every meaningful transformation must eventually face. Whenever a person rises into a new level of awareness, peace, or purpose, the transition rarely happens without resistance. Growth creates movement, and movement always disturbs the patterns that once defined your life. For years, your environment, your relationships, and even your own internal habits were organized around the version of you that lived in survival mode. Now that you have stepped into a higher level of clarity and peace, those old patterns will not disappear quietly. Instead, they often attempt to re-enter your life in subtle and familiar ways. This is why many spiritual traditions speak of tests that appear after breakthroughs. These tests are not punishments. They are checkpoints that reveal whether your transformation is strong enough to sustain the new level you have reached. In the language of this journey, these checkpoints can be understood as three symbolic gatekeepers. They stand at the entrance of your new season, not to stop you from moving forward, but to see whether you truly recognize the difference between your past mindset and your new one. The first of these gatekeepers appears in the form of what we may call the ghost. The ghost represents people, situations, or memories from your past that suddenly reappear just when your life begins to stabilize. It might come in the form of a message from someone you have not heard from in months or years. It could be an old relationship that once caused confusion or emotional exhaustion. Sometimes, it appears as a friend or acquaintance who previously brought negativity into your environment. The timing of these reappearances often feels strangely coincidental. Just when you begin to experience peace, just when you begin to move forward with clarity, the past knocks gently on your door, as if nothing has changed. At first glance, this moment can feel flattering or even comforting. Familiarity has a powerful emotional pull, and the mind often interprets familiarity as safety. But the ghost is not appearing to celebrate your growth. It is appearing to test whether your boundaries are truly established. In the past, you may have allowed certain people or situations to pull you into emotional cycles that drained your energy. Conversations might have turned into arguments. Promises might have turned into disappointments. You may have given second chances repeatedly, hoping that things would eventually change. The ghost arrives to see whether the same door is still open. If you engage with the old pattern, even briefly, the emotional frequency of that past environment can quickly return. The goal of the ghost is simple: to see if the new version of you will behave the same way the old version did. But when you recognize the ghost for what it is, you gain the power to respond differently. Recognition allows you to pause and ask a simple question. Does this interaction belong to the future I am building? Or does it belong to the chapter I have already closed? Sometimes the most powerful response is not confrontation, but quiet distance. Growth often requires the courage to leave certain doors closed, even when nostalgia tries to reopen them. The second gatekeeper appears not outside you, but inside you. This gatekeeper is what we call the mirror. The mirror is the voice of doubt that echoes within your own mind. It often sounds familiar because it is shaped by years of criticism, disappointment, and internalized beliefs about your limitations. The mirror may speak in phrases you heard growing up. It may sound like a parent who once doubted your abilities, a teacher who underestimated your potential, or even the voice of your own past mistakes replaying in memory. When you begin to step into a higher level of confidence and peace, this inner voice may suddenly grow louder. It may ask questions that feel unsettling. Who do you think you are to expect things to improve? What if you fail again like before? What if this calm you feel is only temporary? These thoughts can appear convincing because they are built from experiences that were once real. You did face hardships. You did encounter moments when plans did not work out the way you hoped. But the mirror has a distorted perspective. It shows reflections from your past without acknowledging the growth that has happened since then. It tries to convince you that you are still the same person who struggled before, even though your awareness has already changed. The purpose of the mirror is to test whether you believe in the new identity you are developing. If you accept the reflection it offers, you may begin to question your progress and retreat back into familiar patterns of doubt. But if you recognize the mirror as a reflection of the past, rather than a prediction of the future, its power begins to fade. Instead of accepting every thought as truth, you learn to observe your thoughts with curiosity and awareness. You begin to replace the old narrative with a new understanding of yourself. You remind yourself that growth means you are no longer defined by the same limitations that once shaped your decisions. The third gatekeeper is often the most subtle and the most challenging. This gatekeeper is called the delay. The delay appears when the inner transformation you have experienced has not yet fully manifested in your external circumstances. You may feel peace within yourself, yet the visible evidence of change in your life may still be developing. Opportunities may take time to appear. Financial improvements may unfold gradually. Relationships that align with your new energy may not arrive immediately. During this period, the mind sometimes becomes restless. It begins to ask whether the breakthrough was real or whether it was simply a temporary emotional state. This is the moment when impatience can quietly reopen the door to old patterns. The delay tests your ability to trust the process of growth even when the results are not yet fully visible. Imagine planting seeds in fertile soil. The moment you place the seeds into the ground, the process of growth begins. Yet, for a period of time, nothing appears on the surface. Beneath the soil, roots are forming, and the first signs of life are emerging. But they remain hidden until the plant is strong enough to break through the ground. If someone judged the success of the seed during those early days, they might mistakenly believe that nothing was happening. But the truth is that the most important part of growth is occurring beneath the surface. The delay functions in a similar way within your life. The inner shifts you have made are already shaping your future circumstances, even if those changes are not immediately visible. Your new mindset is influencing the decisions you make, the opportunities you notice, and the relationships you attract. These changes take time to organize themselves into tangible outcomes. When you recognize the delay for what it is, you stop interpreting the waiting period as failure. Instead, you understand it as the natural stage between planting and harvest. Recognizing these three gatekeepers gives you an important advantage as you move forward. The ghost tests your boundaries with the past. The mirror tests your belief in the new identity you are forming. The delay tests your patience and trust in the process of growth. None of these gatekeepers exist to defeat you. They exist to strengthen the clarity of your transformation. Each time you recognize one of them and respond with awareness instead of reaction, your new level becomes more stable. You prove to yourself that your peace is not fragile. It is resilient enough to remain steady even when the past tries to return, when doubt tries to speak, or when progress takes time to appear. By understanding these gatekeepers, you protect the new level of awareness you have reached. Instead of being surprised by these tests, you greet them with calm recognition. You understand that they are simply reminders that your life is changing direction. And with that understanding, you continue moving forward, confident that the peace and clarity you have discovered are strong enough to carry you through every challenge that appears along the path ahead. Learning to guard the frequency begins with an understanding that reaching a new level of peace is only the first step in a much larger journey. Many people experience moments of clarity or breakthrough during their lives, but the difference between a temporary moment and a lasting transformation lies in the ability to protect and maintain that new state of awareness. The calm you have begun to feel is not fragile, yet it exists within a world that often moves at a different rhythm. Outside environments can still be noisy, unpredictable, and emotionally demanding. News headlines may attempt to provoke fear. Conversations with others may introduce negativity or doubt. Daily responsibilities may create pressure that tries to pull your attention back into the familiar habits of stress and urgency. None of these forces are unusual. They are simply part of the world you live in. But when you have stepped into a higher level of inner peace, you must learn a new skill that was not necessary before. You must learn how to guard the frequency of your inner state. Think of your inner peace as a signal that you are now able to receive more clearly. When your mind was trapped in survival mode, that signal was constantly interrupted by static. Stress and anxiety acted like interference that prevented you from accessing deeper awareness. Now that the interference has quieted, you can perceive your thoughts, emotions, and intuition with greater clarity. Yet signals can still be disrupted if they are not protected. Just as a musician protects the tuning of an instrument or a scientist protects a delicate experiment from contamination, you must learn to protect the atmosphere in which your inner clarity thrives. Guarding your frequency does not mean isolating yourself from the world or avoiding responsibility. Instead, it means becoming conscious of the influences that shape your mental and emotional environment. You begin to notice how certain conversations affect your mood. You become aware of how certain habits either strengthen or weaken your sense of calm. Some environments encourage reflection and creativity, while others drain your energy without providing anything meaningful in return. Once you develop this awareness, you gain the ability to choose what deserves your attention and what does not. This ability is powerful because attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess. Wherever your attention goes, your energy follows. If your attention becomes absorbed by negativity, your mind begins to mirror that negativity. If your attention remains focused on clarity and growth, your inner stability becomes stronger. Protecting your frequency, therefore, begins with the small choices you make every day about where you direct your awareness. This is where tools and practices become important. Throughout history, people who sought higher levels of understanding developed methods to stabilize their inner state. Some used prayer as a way to reconnect with purpose and gratitude. Others practiced meditation or quiet reflection to calm the nervous system and observe their thoughts without reacting to them. Journaling has helped many people translate their emotions into clarity by placing their thoughts onto paper. Physical movements such as walking, breathing exercises, or mindful stretching can also help the body release tension that might otherwise accumulate throughout the day. These practices are not magical solutions, yet they create an environment where your mind can remain balanced even when life presents challenges. When practiced consistently, they act like anchors that keep your awareness grounded. Over time, these anchors train your nervous system to return to calm more quickly whenever stress attempts to take control. In addition to personal practices, guarding your frequency also involves the relationships you maintain. Human beings are deeply influenced by the emotional tone of the people around them. If you spend large amounts of time with individuals who constantly complain, criticize, or dwell on negativity, your mind may gradually absorb that same outlook. On the other hand, when you interact with people who approach life with curiosity, responsibility, and hope, your own perspective becomes stronger. This does not mean you must judge or reject those who are struggling. Compassion remains an essential quality of growth, but it does mean that you must be mindful about the environments you repeatedly expose yourself to. Your peace is not selfish. It is the foundation that allows you to contribute positively to the world around you. Without protecting that foundation, it becomes difficult to sustain the clarity you have worked so hard to develop. Understanding this principle leads to another important realization about success. Many people imagine success as a dramatic moment of achievement, a single event where everything changes instantly. While certain events can certainly feel transformative, lasting success rarely appears in the form of one grand moment. Instead, it emerges through consistent alignment with the principles that support your growth. Every day offers small opportunities to either reinforce your new level of awareness or drift back into the habits of your past. The difference between these two outcomes is determined by the choices you make repeatedly. When you choose patience instead of impulsive reaction, you strengthen your peace. When you choose reflection instead of constant distraction, you deepen your clarity. When you choose gratitude instead of resentment, you expand your sense of possibility. These choices may appear minor individually, but together, they form the habits that define your long-term direction. Over time, alignment becomes a natural part of your life, rather than something that requires constant effort. Just as the body becomes stronger through consistent exercise, your awareness becomes stronger through consistent attention to the thoughts and actions that support it. Guarding your frequency, therefore, becomes less about resisting chaos and more about cultivating stability. The calm you carry within yourself begins to shape how you respond to the world. When challenges appear, you approach them from a place of thoughtful observation rather than immediate reaction. When opportunities arise, you recognize them more easily because your mind is not clouded by fear. You become someone who moves through life with a steady presence, able to listen carefully, think clearly, and act intentionally. People around you may begin to notice this difference, even if they cannot explain it. They may sense that your energy is calmer, your perspective wider, and your decisions more deliberate. What they are observing is the result of a frequency that is no longer dominated by survival thinking. By guarding this frequency, you sustain the victory you have already unlocked. The breakthrough you experienced earlier was not simply a moment of relief from struggle. It was the beginning of a new chapter where your inner stability becomes the guiding force of your life. Every time you protect that stability through mindful choices, supportive practices, and intentional relationships, you reinforce the transformation that brought you here. Over time, the calm that once felt unfamiliar becomes the most natural state you know. It becomes the foundation upon which you build your goals, your relationships, and your sense of purpose. Instead of constantly fighting the chaos around you, you learn to stand calmly within it, knowing that your clarity cannot be easily shaken. And as this understanding deepens, you realize that guarding your frequency is not a burden, but a privilege. It is the practice that allows you to live with greater awareness, greater resilience, and a quiet confidence that your journey is moving in the right direction. The sealing of the breakthrough begins with a quiet invitation to pause and recognize the distance you have already traveled. Throughout this journey, you have explored the shifts that occur when a person moves from survival into awareness, from reaction into restraint, and from inherited struggle into intentional growth. Now, at the closing moment of this message, you are asked to bring all of those insights together into a single realization. Something significant has already changed within you. The calm you feel, the clarity you are beginning to recognize, and the perspective you have gained are not temporary emotions. They are the early signs of a deeper transformation that is taking root within your identity. To seal this transformation, you are invited to imagine yourself standing firmly within this new version of who you are becoming. Picture yourself not as the person who once carried the full weight of confusion and constant conflict, but as someone who has stepped beyond those patterns. See yourself standing upright with a sense of quiet strength, aware that the struggles you endured were not meaningless obstacles, but lessons that prepared you for this exact moment. When you visualize this image, you are not pretending or imagining something unrealistic. You are acknowledging the truth that your journey has already begun to shape you into someone more resilient, more aware, and more capable of guiding your life with intention. This visualization represents the point where the old identity begins to release its hold, and the new identity takes its place. As you hold this image in your mind, a declaration naturally follows from it. The generational battle that once defined your story is no longer the central force directing your path. For years, you may have felt as if you were carrying struggles that belonged not only to your own life, but to the lives that came before you. Those cycles of fear, doubt, limitation, or conflict may have appeared so often that they seemed unavoidable. Yet the very decisions you made during your journey, the moments when you chose patience instead of anger, and awareness instead of reaction, began to weaken those cycles until they could no longer continue in the same way. This declaration does not deny the existence of the past. Instead, it recognizes that the past no longer holds authority over the future you are creating. The patterns that once shaped your environment have reached their conclusion because you have chosen a different direction. From this moment forward, your story is not defined by inherited limitations, but by the choices you make with the clarity you now possess. Alongside this declaration comes another important element of the sealing process, and that is protection. When a person enters a new level of awareness, it becomes essential to protect the mental and emotional environment that supports it. Protection does not mean isolation from the world, nor does it mean pretending that challenges will never appear again. Rather, it means acknowledging that your peace, your clarity, and your sense of purpose are valuable qualities worth guarding. You protect them by remaining conscious of the influences that shape your thinking. You protect them by continuing the practices that help you return to calm whenever stress attempts to disturb it. You protect them by remembering the lessons that brought you to this point, especially the understanding that your responses carry more power than the situations themselves. In this sense, protection is not a defensive posture, but a form of respect for the growth you have achieved. It is the commitment to ensure that the transformation you have begun will continue to unfold with strength and stability. As this moment of sealing approaches its final step, a question arises that only you can answer. It is a simple question, yet it carries profound meaning, because it speaks directly to your willingness to fully embrace the life that is opening before you. The question is this: are you ready to walk in this new power? Power, in this context, does not refer to control over others or dramatic displays of authority. It refers to the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are and choosing your path with awareness. It is the power to remain calm when others expect reaction, the power to pursue purpose instead of repeating old patterns, and the power to trust the direction your growth is leading you. Answering this question requires honesty with yourself. It asks whether you are prepared to release the comfort of familiar struggles and step fully into the clarity you have discovered. When your answer becomes yes, that response carries more significance than it may initially appear. Saying yes is not merely an affirmation, it is an act of commitment. It signals that you are willing to live according to the awareness you have gained. It confirms that you accept the responsibility of guarding your peace and nurturing the new identity that has begun to emerge. In that moment, the breakthrough becomes sealed not by external circumstances, but by your own decision to honor the transformation taking place within you. From that point forward, you are no longer waiting for change to arrive. You are actively walking in the level of growth that your journey has already unlocked.